Welcome to Home Ground. I'm Brian Kahn. Folk music runs deep in the American tradition, and it continues to flourish in the American West. Musical instruments change with time, and by far the majority of today's musicians understandably rely on modern instruments. So why would someone go against the grain, releasing an album where all the songs are played on a 90s generation acoustic guitar? That is 1890s. Britt Arnesen of Missoula is about to tell us. Britt, many thanks for joining us on Home Ground.
Thank you for having me.
Where'd you grow up? What'd your folks do?
I grew up in beautiful Juneau, Alaska, and also Anchorage, Alaska. My parents divorced when I was small, so I had the best of both of those places.
Wow.
And my dad was a garbage man.
Yes.
I watched him build a garbage company, and my mother was a bureaucrat.
Now, what kind of bureaucrat?
She loved protecting the environment and protecting vulnerable people.
Who did she work for?
She
in those
worked for the
jobs?
state of Alaska and also nonprofits at times.
First, tell me a little bit about building a garbage company. It sounds like you were there for that process.
Yeah, I have wonderful memories of riding with my dad in the garbage truck at 6 o'clock in the morning. He would take us to the landfill, the recycle center. We'd go to Costco, pick up a container, take it to the landfill, go back, get a different container, take it to the recycle center. And sometimes that was the only way I could spend time with him. But I watched him grow that company, treating all of his vendors with respect and just working hard, and that stuck with me.
Okay, now tell me about your mom's, what you got from your mom in terms of, did you get to see her work or did you pick up values from her work as well?
Well, here we are in the capital city of Helena and the capital city of Juneau. I would follow my mom to work routinely. She worked for the Senate Finance Committee for a while, and I got to watch her be a part of lawmaking when I was a little kid. And then she continued with that, worked for the Department of Fish and Game, and for me, it was just walking to my mom's office after school, and maybe later I realized the importance of some of the work she was doing, protecting fish habitat or standing up for the little guy.
All right, let me ask you this. That's a very interesting set of parents with very different work. How did that experience influence you? Let's say, getting out of high school. Did those experiences with your parents influence your values, and if so, how?
Absolutely. I feel like sometimes there's two of me because I grew up in two different places, but there's a part of me that does want to make the world a better place. And I've always been a part of public service. If I'm not working in a job in some fashion, then I'll stick with my volunteer work. But so I always thought that I should do something that makes the world a better place. And then I watched my father grow a company from scratch, and I feel like I could do anything, absolutely anything. So when I was old enough to make my own decisions, that's what I started doing and hit the road.
So you went to high school in Alaska?
I graduated from Juneau Douglas High School.
And that's south, is that not correct, southern Alaska?
Southeast Alaska. They call it the rain country. It's a temperate rainforest, very wet and cold.
Now, I think you also spent time in Fairbanks.
I love Fairbanks. When I was old enough to choose where I could live, that's where I wanted to go.
Now, that's central, traditional, we think of Alaska, right? Cold.
Very cold.
Very cold country.
It's actually a lot like Missoula where I live now, surprisingly. There's a lot of variety of different kinds of people. It's very easy to fit in there, and so I always felt artistically like I was a little different, but I found very many people that were so similar. It's just a wonderful place to be a different person.
Did you go beyond high school, education-wise?
I did get a degree from the University of Alaska Fairbanks. That's how I ended up falling in love with Fairbanks. I went to college there.
Okay, what was your degree?
In biology. I studied tundra plants.
That'll be another show.
They're pretty cool.
They're pretty short, I'm guessing, right?
And they live a long time. There was one plant I learned about that made its flower buds 7 years in advance. That's how slow growing it was. It would have to plan for 7 years to make a flower bud.
That's incredible.
And it's incredible they survive up there and how delicate they are, those plants.
And yet tenacious.
Very tenacious. After I graduated from college, I had my son and moved back to Juneau to start raising him. I took a job as a fishery biologist there and had a pretty simple life for a while, but I kept playing music.
How did you get into music?
I had always played piano when I was a kid. My elementary school music teacher introduced me to a love of music, and there wasn't anyone else in my family who was particularly musical. So I'm really grateful to my mother that she bought me lessons so that I could learn how to play the piano. And that was a gateway for me to composing music. And then eventually I learned that a guitar would be a more appropriate accompaniment for singing. So I learned how to play guitar when I was a teenager.
Why did you want to sing?
Because I was writing songs and I had to sing them. And actually at first I didn't really want to sing. I was always hoping someone else would sing my songs for me. And after many years of writing songs and no one else but me singing them, I realized I was going to have to get better at singing because I was going to be, at least for the time being, the only person that would be singing these songs.
So going back to your earliest memories of it, what attracted you to music and to singing at the same time, in what order and why?
For me, it was always about the songs. I would hear a song and fall in love with it, and it was a compulsion. There was something I couldn't get away from. I see this on the faces of children sometimes at the farmer's market when I'm playing music. About 1 in 100 children that gets paraded by me in a stroller just flies out of their stroller because they hear the music and they're touched by it. And that's a kid like me whose parents hopefully are going to buy them lessons when they're older. Because for some people, music it's a compulsion. You can't stop doing it. And so there was never a question that I was going to play music. It was just a matter of how and when. And I do thank my mom for doing the best she could to get me into it, but she kind of didn't know what to do. So I drove that bus like, Mom, I want piano lessons. And then when I wanted a guitar, she did buy me a cheap guitar, my first guitar, for $200 some, and I broke it in half by accident. And so then I had to buy the next one.
And what did you do for income to pay for the guitar?
I had a job shoveling and cleaning out dog kennels for a groomer. It was a dirty, dirty job, but yeah, I had seen my dad work hard with what he called the smell of money. And so I knew that I could scrub my way to financial freedom. And unfortunately, I chose a really expensive and kind of silly guitar for the sole reason that it was blue. I wanted this $900 guitar. It took me a long time to save up enough money to get it, but I did get that blue guitar.
Every time I lose you, calling out to the lonesome moon and waiting on a white flower to bloom.
You're listening to Home Ground, and I'm Brian Kahn. We are talking with musician, singer Britt Arnesen about her music. Tell us about the piece of music we heard.
That's the title track from my new CD, which is called Dream in Blue. And the story lyrically in the song, it's a murder ballad, which is pretty common in the mountain music tradition, that someone dies and it's usually told from the murderer's perspective. But I wanted to tell a story from the victim's perspective. So in the story, the woman has been drowned and her ghost is haunting the man. But it's also wrapped up as a tragic love story about loss. When I started working on the CD, I commissioned a painting for the cover, and the painting was done before I started recording. And when I looked at the painting, it was just obvious to me that the painting was a dream in blue. And so that's why I chose that song to open up the album and titled the album after it.
And this song you wrote?
I did write it, yes.
It raises a question for me. When I think of folk music, I'm old enough to remember the music of Woody Guthrie. I think I met Pete Seeger when I was a child. My generation was Bob Dylan, and I prefer his acoustic music. But in all of that music, there is, I would say, serious tension. It's not just good feelings. How does that statement, if coming from a layperson, sound to you?
For me, that's the sign of really good music, to be able to discuss serious, deep issues that are, frankly, universal to most humans, and to do so in a way that still feels uplifting. To talk about something like the death of a loved one, or injustices in society, or getting your heart broken, to be able to openly talk about those things but come out of it feeling better somehow. That's the sign of good music. It's got an edge to it. Life is harsh. You want to acknowledge that, but you also want your music to provide a path forward, something to look forward to.
Someone might say that's not a thing that our culture does too well in the normal course of daily living, being able to openly discuss the hard side, the dark side, the painful side, and move forward. Would you agree with that?
I do agree with that. Sometimes I think if people aren't listening to my music carefully, they might think it's a bit of bubblegum, but there's drownings on the new CD. People don't make it to the end. Hearts are broken. Life is hard. The story on track 2, Calamity Jane, is about a woman who pretended to be a Western star but was really a performer on Broadway that drank herself to death. To me, that's a story of tragedy, and so I like to be able to tell a story like that, but at the same time, I still want to feel like the horse is galloping off into the sunset in at least a blaze of glory.
Let's take the second part of that. I'm tempted to say that reflects either a personal and a cultural optimism. Some people might say tragedy is tragedy, end of story, but you're saying it should be uplifting. Why do you feel that way?
For me, I just have to feel that way because I suffer from depression from time to time, and I need music to pull me out of it. My heart gets broken, and almost every song I've ever written came from a huge ocean of my own tears, even if it's a happy song, even if I was writing about something completely different than what was on my mind. The music still comes from that place, that raw place inside where things really are broken, and we all have different ways of dealing with that. I'm glad you mentioned Bob Dylan because I obviously wasn't there for it. I'm 34 years old now, so the Bob Dylan that I've seen is not the same as happened back in the 1960s, but I love listening to that music. It's wonderfully written, and I'm glad that he won a Nobel Prize. It kind of gives people like me a more cultural permission to be a huge Bob Dylan fan. I play in a bluegrass band in Missoula called Pinegrass, and we put together a Bob Dylan bluegrass tribute show for first night this year. Really fun.
In terms of music, let's say even dealing with tragedy, your feeling of wanting to be able to have it in the end move forward, do you think that's a cultural phenomenon? I'm just thinking of the universality of music and why people crave it. Do you think it has that sort of salutary or ennobling, or I don't know quite what the word would be, uplifting effect on people broadly? It is universal. What's your sense for why that is?
There's been some studies about this, and there's a large portion of the population that is very moved by music. A smaller section that is not, but still likes to be around it because it's so common. Mm-hmm. But for most people, the brain and the heart are affected by music.
When you say affected, that means measurably affected
Measurably
in some sort of scientific
affected.
effect.
Yes.
Huh.
And there's all sorts of different studies on this, and I'm just a lay person as far as my understanding of it, but it's also very obvious when I'm playing a show and I reach people, and I can feel that when somebody tears up at a song. There's some people like me, that are deeply affected by music. When music's playing, I can't focus on anything else. It captures my whole attention. So sometimes I actually just need to turn all the music off and be in a quiet room, because if there's any music playing, it will just keep playing in my head even after you turn off the stereo. And there's a lot of people that are like me too.
Let's talk about the musical instruments that you use. I mentioned at the top of the show that you play with a guitar that was built, unless I'm mistaken, 1891.
There's a pencil marking under the top of the guitar. I saw it with a mirror and flashlight. It reads April 1891.
How did you come across it?
This is one of the most amazing and kind and generous stories of my life. I was at a dinner party with my mother and one of her childhood friends, and they asked if I could play some music at the party, so I brought one of my own guitars that I'd been traveling with. We were in the Bay Area, San Francisco Bay, and I had my 1946 Gibson LG2 with me, and I played a song for them on that. And then she went down to her basement and pulled up this instrument that had belonged to her grandfather, and she wanted me to look at it and see if I could tell her what it was, because she knew that I knew something about guitars. And so I saw this old coffin case. They call it a coffin case because it kind of looks a bit like a coffin. It's old black original case.
We're looking at it, and to me as a layman, it's got sharp edges as opposed to the sort of round plastic look that it must be made of some sort of hardwood?
It's pine.
Pine.
And this is the best that they could do back then. This was the state of the art of guitar protection technology in 1891.
Well, it seems to have worked since the guitar has survived. The guitar looks to me like a guitar, but smaller. Am I wrong?
Yeah, and so when I first got a look at this guitar, I wasn't really quite sure what to make of it. It was certainly the oldest guitar I'd ever seen. It's so old, it doesn't really say Martin anywhere obviously on it. You have to kind of dig to see.
So it is a Martin.
It is a Martin. It says C.F. Martin and Co., which means it was made after 1868 when they incorporated. That was the first clue. They started in New York City and moved out to Nazareth, Pennsylvania. And this one says, it has two stamps. One says Martin and Co., New York, and the other says Martin, New York.
So you were saying you looked at it and wondered...
Yeah, what is this? And then I just started raving about all its amazing features, like this quarter-sawn, old-growth Brazilian rosewood just cut in this perfect... Those are the back and sides.
Okay.
And then the top is this beautiful spruce, which is honeyed into this amber color that you can only get after 120 years. For me, as a guitar nerd, this was very exciting, and I just stuck my face right in the sound hole and was just raving about, oh, and look at this, and look at this. And in the meantime, my mom's friend Kim Rice and her husband Charlie were sitting there on the couch whispering to each other that they were plotting to give me this guitar, and when they did, it was just one of the most incredible moments of my life to just be given something like this. I don't consider myself an owner, I'm more of a caretaker. I'm safeguarding this piece of American history for the next generation, but it's also meant to be played, just like a Stradivarius violin doesn't sit in a museum, it gets played. It's important for the instruments to be played to keep the wood vibrating so they don't seize up.
You're listening to Home Ground, and I'm Brian Kahn. We are talking with Britt Arnesen, folk singer and folk song writer, about her work and about the instruments she uses to help create her work. Did you expect it would play well?
Yeah, usually a guitar this old might not play very well. Most of the time there are condition issues, cracks, the bridge can come up, the neck can be warped, the neck angle can be really bad, and on this guitar it appears that repairs have never been done to it, so I came at it with an attitude of preservation. It is playable in its current condition, but it's very difficult to play.
Why difficult?
It's got a huge wide neck that's very flat. Modern guitars have a slight radius to the fingerboard, so you can wrap your fingers around them easier. It has what they call bar frets. They're actually kind of sharp. And so there's these different features about it. And you also can't really use a pick.
Why is that?
It's just a little bit too delicate of a sound. The thing is very small and lightweight, and they didn't really start using picks on guitars till the early 19th century when they changed the structure of guitars. Like, this guitar is so old, it can't accommodate steel strings like you'd put on a modern guitar.
What are the strings made of?
These strings that I have on here are gut.
Wow.
Some people would use nylon in modern times, but I like the sound of gut. It's a more natural sound, doesn't sound quite as plasticky. In modern times, people still use them. I still run gut strings on my upright bass, too, because I like the way they feel. But in order to transition to guitars being larger and louder with steel strings, they had to change the bracing pattern so they could still keep the top thin, but expand the size of the guitar.
Given this fantastic, someone might say, artifact, but I understand you use this to make your music.
It's a tool.
So how is it different? How does it affect you in any way?
The playing technique on this is entirely different. I typically am seen playing bluegrass music, which is loud. We talk about drive and bluegrass. You really attack the instrument. Attack is another word that we use, and it's all about the bite and the grab. And this is just the opposite of that. It wants a delicate touch. You touch it very lightly, and it just rings and keeps ringing. So it was almost a whole different universe to step in there, and it took a long time to get to know the guitar before I tried recording with it. I had it for over a year before I even started arranging my music on it. So I think I was still just a little superstitious about how it came to me. It was so lucky, so special. And the guitar has a name. His name is Bartholomew, which was the name of Kim's grandfather, who she thinks was the original owner. So this guitar came across probably a train to San Francisco at the turn of the century and was gifted to a young boy who kept it till his death. And it was in her basement for almost 50 years before anyone opened the case, and that was me.
Wow.
So I feel very lucky to have this and to bring it back to life. When I first got it, it was a little stiff. If they haven't vibrated in a while, they do get a little stiff, like maybe the nose is plugged. I mean, it's vibration, it's hertz, it's wood and metal and bone and ivory and all these parts, and they're kind of jostling. And so the more you play it, the better it sounds. It gets used to vibrating.
Okay, it's one thing to say, this is special, and when I play it, I have a special feeling. But you use this for your whole album?
I used it for the whole album, and that was really wonderful. At first, I thought it might be limiting to do a project where I was setting myself such a boundary, a hard boundary. We'll just use this one guitar. And I recorded it live, just in my living room. And once I got into it, it was such a fun exploration. Because the technique is so different, I have to play it finger style. I can't use a pick and can't use another tool we use a lot called a capo, which allows you to change the key without having to retune the guitar or change your finger positions. So just the way that this guitar is, I can't put a capo on it. It would damage the frets too much, and they've never been replaced, so I need to protect them in original condition. So I had to relearn everything in different positions, different keys. Also, because it's so old, I didn't want to risk taking it up to a high tension. Modern music is played at a high pitch, a high tension, and so I have it tuned down lower than what you would typically tune a modern guitar to, just to protect it, make sure it doesn't crack.
Here you are making a choice in releasing this album to have it all done with this guitar. Now, people are not going to buy this album because you put on the label with an 1891 guitar. Did you sacrifice anything artistically or in the end result by using it? Or it sounds like, from a layman's standpoint, you're handicapping yourself.
It does sound that way, and at first I worried about that. But then once I got into it, there was a freedom in that limitation.
What do you mean by that?
If you draw a circle around yourself and say, you got to dance in this circle, well, eventually you find out where those boundaries are, and then your dancing takes on this beautiful circular pattern. And so I think after I got into the groove of it, I realized that this was going to be my best work ever. And it is. It's as my mom said, the physical embodiment of my lifetime of writing and performing music and my achievement as a guitar player.
When you perform, are you basically saying you switch exclusively to this guitar, or do you use more traditional guitars for, let's say, your performing work?
It kind of depends on what I'm doing. A lot of what I do is in bands where I am one of many things on the stage, and this guitar, frankly, wouldn't really be loud enough for a band situation.
I was struck by that because you were saying everything now is accentuating the loud.
Right. In the 1920s, 30s, 40s, as Martin and Gibson, the great American guitar makers, were perfecting the design of the guitar, guitars took more of a central role in bands, but it used to be kind of a mandolin, fiddle, banjo world because those are what's loud. So when I'm playing with mandolin, fiddle, banjo, I'm often playing upright bass or my steel string guitar. For guitar nerds that are listening, I have a 1948 Gibson J45, which is one of the finest guitars in this state. And so that's what I typically play. But when I'm playing by myself, I often bring the old Martin because it really complements my voice and songwriting really well.
My brother is a longtime folk singer, and the names Gibson and Martin both ring a bell to me because I know he's had both over time and prized them. Recognizing those are classic names, is there anybody today that's making guitars that are worthy of a young person's investing in?
We are really lucky in Montana to have several very talented guitar building companies here. The Bent Twig Guitar Company in Libby actually, they built me a replica coffin case for my Martin guitar. And I loaned them the guitar for a while so they could examine it and get ideas. The guitar's also been over to the studio of John Walker in Alberton, who's a very talented guitar builder, used to work for Gibson and now makes his own guitars. We have just a wonderful assortment of builders here. Tom Sheehy from Helena.
What are we talking about at just a ballpark figure for buying a new guitar of that quality? What's it cost?
A modern handmade in America quality guitar is probably going to run you $4,000 to $8,000, depending on what kind of wood. And if it's a builder with a great reputation, the sky's the limit.
All right, and what about the Martin or the Gibson classic guitars? What are we talking about?
It really depends. A modern, you can get a new Gibson for $3,000, but the vintage ones, they can they can just be excessively expensive. I mean, there are some that are very rare and iconic, like the J45, like I have, for example, is a very iconic instrument, and sometimes those fetch ridiculous speculative values.
Like?
I've played them that were worth over $100,000.
Going to your album for a minute, you have a piece there that is influenced or somehow it's titled something to do with Dvorak. What are we talking about? Why is that there?
The song is titled Going Home, which was the name of a hymn that was words written to Dvorak's New World Symphony, number 9.
Written approximately when?
About the same time my guitar was made. And he was from Prague and came to America and was inspired by American folk music, which explains why the symphony has hints of American folk music in it. And the instrumental melody fits very nicely onto an acoustic guitar. So I recorded that track mainly for my mother, because that was always her favorite song that I played on the piano when I was a kid.
Let's listen to it. You've described the special historical significance of your guitar, Bartholomew, but from the standpoint of a musician, is the sound that it produces different in any way from the classic guitars that you talked about, the Gibson and the Martin?
Yeah, I've had a wonderful opportunity to play many vintage guitars as I travel, and they are very special. There's something magic about the age of the guitars. The older they get, the better they sound. If they're maintained in good repair and played, there's nothing more magic than an old guitar. The wood breaks in over time, and it gets used to vibrating at the musical frequencies. So a guitar from 1891 is going to sound more magical, more deep, more rounded and rich and resonant than a modern parlor guitar replica, for example. And at first it might seem hokey, like why would anybody want a guitar from 1920 when you could buy something from today that maybe could last longer, be built better. They were built amazingly well back then, and they have stood the test of time. It's still here, and it's in wonderful condition, and it's had all that experience to vibrate at those musical frequencies, and it's free. And that sound, there's a woody magic in that. For me, it's like riding a magic carpet playing an old special vintage guitar, because they have such a unique voice.
So when you're playing that instrument with those qualities, how does it make you feel?
I wake up every morning and I can't wait to take my instrument out of its case. As soon as 9 o'clock rolls around and the guy that lives below me is okay with me starting to make noise, I have an instrument out. And this Martin guitar is, Bartholomew is the one I reach for. I've been writing some new music on it. It's so resonant that it draws me where it wants to take me.
Britt Arnesen, I very much regret to say we're out of time, and I want to thank you so much for being with us on Home Ground.
Thank you.
To our listeners, many thanks for being with us. We hope you'll join us next week. Home Ground is an independent production of Artemis Common Ground and does not necessarily reflect the views of this radio station. Post-production by Valtron Recording Studios. We welcome your ideas for new programs. Contact us at www.homegroundradio.org. Home Ground is made possible by grants from the Liz Claiborne Art Ortenberg Foundation, the Cinnabar Foundation, the Lee and Donna Metcalf Charitable Trust, Humanities Montana, and the Greater Montana Foundation, encouraging communication on issues, trends, and values of importance to Montanans.